I thank the organizers for inviting me to give this presentation. So we are talking about point-of-care ultrasound in critical care hepatology, essentially. I have no relevant disclosures for this. Largely, we are going to be covering how POCUS is actually changing clinical practice in hepatology services in terms of how we are looking at abdominal ultrasound, with how we are correlating it with the point-of-care echocardiography, how it affects our management of patients with kidney disease, how coronary events or cardiac events in cirrhosis, which are the final causes of death, can be preempted or prevented. And then to look at lung ultrasound, because a lot of focus on management of critically ill involves use of fluids and vasopressors. So we need to also learn about the lung ultrasound, which is relevant. And finally, how do we use our knowledge of point-of-care ultrasound to actually intervene in critically ill patients? So first, coming to the liver and the heart. Now, most of the time when we discuss about liver and the heart, people think in terms of coronary artery disease, sudden cardiac death, But most of the time, the disease that is actually associated with the liver is cirrhotic cardiomyopathy, where we have a weakening of the muscle of the heart and the cardiac reserve in terms of its ability to tolerate infections, its ability to tolerate dehydration, overdiuresis, all that is threatened. And it also affects the ability of the cardiac musculature to respond to transient events like dyselectrolytemia. So these patients are more prone to arrhythmias. So if you actually look at your practice over the last 20 years, you'll see that the sudden cardiac deaths have not occurred because of coronary events. Those are fewer, whereas our Western literature would say the opposite. Even though India is the hotbed of metabolic dysfunction-associated liver disease in the world. So sudden cardiac events, please look at it in terms of cirrhotic cardiomyopathy. So initially, you will just have a preserved ejection fraction. EF will be high in patients. A cirrhotic heart is a very hard-working, hyperdynamic heart with elevated cardiac output. So if initially there is some strain, say infection, say excess albumin, say terlipressin, any stressor that's given to this muscle, in that case, a patient may initially have no problems. Patient may be able to tolerate it. So this is a compensated phase. Just like there's compensated cirrhosis, there's compensated cirrhotic cardiomyopathy. When the patient begins to decompensate and have heart failure symptoms is where the cardiac reserve is actually going down. When does that happen? So this switch from a compensated heart failure with preserved ejection fraction to a decompensated cardiac disease in liver disease is what we need to understand, and is the basis of our understanding of POCUS in clinical hepatology practice. So cirrhotic cardiomyopathy refers to any weakness of the heart which happens secondary to endogenous cytokines or systemic inflammation, which is associated with any long-standing hepatic disease. It can also be seen in terms of myocarditis in patients with acute liver failure. So please remember, and cholecardia, where they have high bile acids. So any of these can compromise cardiac function in a certain way. So we normally think when our cardiologist is sent a referral, they will give us an ejection fraction, which is perfectly normal. So now you need to look at it in terms of the global longitudinal strain. Is the contractility actually okay? Even though the EF might be normal, is the muscle contracting normally? Is there any jerky motion of the septum? So these things can be easily seen on the POCUS of the heart. So this is a global longitudinal strain, which is one component of systolic dysfunction in cirrhotic cardiomyopathy. Second concept, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction and heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. We have to rethink and reattune ourselves to what we learned in medicine 20 years ago and understand that in cirrhotic cardiomyopathy or any cardiac dysfunction in liver disease, the heart failure is actually due to preserved ejection fraction. EF may be as high as 70%, 80%. The heart desperately tries to pump out whatever volume is there. So this is diastolic heart failure. So when you ask for an echocardiography, you have to tell your intensivist or your cardiologist to actually tell you about the diastology variables as well. So how do we do a POCUS in CCM? We use the classical windows, which are done in a conventional echocardiography, which is the parasternal short axis and long axis views, the apical four-chamber view, and the subcostal view, where we're looking at the great vessels. You need to have certain variables that the cardiologist must tell you, or you should learn to record yourself, which is the left atrial volume index, which actually gives a degree of distensibility or over-distension of the left atrium. This happens with fluid boluses, with excessive terlipressin use, wherever you're trying to expand, volume expand. Then there is the mitral relaxation time. So this is seen by the mitral valve Doppler. So you have the EA ratio that we use for early and late mitral diastolic filling. Then there's a tissue Doppler. This is a measure of how weak the heart muscle is. So the tissue Doppler is the movement of the cardiac muscle itself at the level of the mitral valve annulus. So the E prime velocity is a variable that you need to be looking at. Anything less than 7 is abnormal. Next is portopulmonary hypertension being measured at the bedside. How do you look at right heart pressures? So this is the right heart systolic pressure that is measured by looking at the continuous wave Doppler across the tricuspid valve. Although it seems complicated, actually it's just 4 variables. Looking at the right heart by tricuspid jet, looking at the mitral flow, and looking at the left atrial diastology, so the expansion. If you have these variables, you can largely classify whether the patient has cirrhotic cardiomyopathy or not. This entire POCUS examination takes just 5 minutes. You need to do it just once in your patients who are admitted for inpatient care. So the diastology variables we know. Systolic we are going to look at in terms of reduced ejection fraction or reduced cardiac index. And we are going to have, if any of these 3 variables are abnormal, then we are going to diagnose the patient with cirrhotic cardiomyopathy. And what does it predispose to? Any number of things. Sudden pulmonary edema, non-response to terlipressin, and sudden cardiac deaths. The next thing which all of us need to learn is how to assess the inferior vena cava. So this is important in any patient who's coming to us with overdiuresis, paracentesis-induced circulatory dysfunction, anyone who's received blood components and is suddenly having shortness of breath, so TRALI or TACO, anyone who is having pancreatitis, and needs to be given fluids, and they are at risk of ARDS, so we need to learn how to look at the IVC. So if you're looking at the IVC in the midline, the IVC is actually going to go up towards the right atrium and the aorta goes behind the heart to form the arch. So what students very often do is something like side walling. They measure the vessel as a composite of the aorta and the IVC. So what you need to learn to do is to look at the middle hepatic vein, entering into the IVC, and then measure at right angles to the vessel wall, it directly at entrance to the right atrium. This is the most important. That's why a single observer doing it is preferable, or a standardized technique that is learned by all of the physicians in that setting. So if you have a high collapsibility, you can look at it by M mode, or it is completely full. Here you'll see it's almost a straight tube, so this is a fully filled IVC. This is a very narrow tube which is almost touching, kissing at some point, so this is an underfilled person, and this is a normal respiratory variation. So this is the conventional practice that we follow, IVC, but what I'm now going to tell you is something called the velocity time integral. Just go one step further. We're all comfortable with IVC. So velocity time integral is actually measured at the LV outflow, and this is the volume of blood that is getting pumped into the aorta from the LV at the level of the LV outflow tract or the infundibulum. So this is going to give us a good cardiac output. It is the most reliable, non-invasive, and objective finding of cardiac output in the patients. Even these high-end flow track devices are not calibrated for high vasopressor use or patients who are being pumped with a lot of fluids. That arithmetic equation is utilized only for surgery in general practice. So those are healthy hearts which are being tested under, long surgeries, and that's why they have a flow track device. So using these in the ICU is not only expensive, not only invasive and prone to develop sepsis because you have an arch line and a central line, whereas a POCUS is non-invasive and dynamic and also the most reliable. So please try to teach your residents to learn the VTI. It is actually easier to perform than the IVC. And I would invite you all, if you would visit PGI at some time, I'll be happy to teach it to you. That's the first point, understanding the cardiac assessment. How does this help? So if we look at cirrhotic cardiomyopathy per se, we looked at adverse outcomes in acute on chronic liver failure. We all know we are looking at MAP targets. In sepsis, we are looking at MAP targets. But what we're not looking at is what will actually cause death, which is sudden cardiac events. So a reduction in E prime velocity and an elevation in E by E prime velocity actually predicts cardiac death in ACLF, rather all-cause mortality. And we did try to incorporate these elements into the MELD CLIF-C ACLF with the MELD sodium score, and it actually performed better. It has the highest ROC in patients with severe sepsis. So this is a subset where you're going to have systolic or circulatory dysfunction. So this is an important analysis of POCUS at the bedside. If we look at patients with severe sepsis, Dr. Krishnadas has already told us about all the sepsis biomarkers, but they are going to predict sepsis, no sepsis, recovery. What is going to predict death? It could be cardiac variables. So looking at NT-proBNP, galectin-3 can actually help when we are looking at predictors of outcomes in patients with severe sepsis. Second thing, really important, choice of fluids. We are always asked crystalloid, colloid, right from the Rivers et al. SAFE study, all the way back 30 years now, we still don't know. There's still a lot of conflicting evidence. And the fact is that the rate of resuscitation actually influences cardiac overload or pulmonary edema. So if you're rushing albumin within an hour, whereas you're giving albumin slowly, how do you decide that? By POCUS. If you look at POCUS and you're seeing that the cardiac index is improving, give it gradually. You can also give enteral fluid resuscitation in these cases. There's no need to hurry. You can also decide when to give vasopressor. If the systemic vasculation is very vasodilated, the SVR is very high, then you're going to require vasopressor use. If the cardiac index is low and ejection fraction is low, you need to give an inotrope. So choice of fluid will prevent this high rate of pulmonary edema that was seen in this trial and might actually help us decide the choice of fluid much better. This also brings us to POCUS of the lung. Well, tube placement. I think we have been using this more and more to judge whether tubes are being placed rather than using a stethoscope and looking for chest rise. Looking at lung sliding, looking at B lines in the lung can actually determine whether the patient is developing an ARDS physiology in conjunction with the cardiac evaluation. So we need to be using this ubiquitous tool in our ICUs, which is underutilized. And it adds on to the clinical examination at the bedside. You don't need to order CTs, you don't need to order anything else. Where else can we use it? Patient has come with refractory ascites or large volume paracentesis. You need to decide for a TAP. How much volume can be taken? Are they at risk of PICD? Are you going to wait for a PRA at 7 days? No, we are going to do a POCUS. We are going to actually look at the cardiac index if it is reducing. If the patient is severely volume depleted, maybe give another albumin the next day itself. That will preempt HRS-AKI developing on day 7. It is also useful to look at volume status assessment in patients with hyponatremia. So rather than giving tolvaptan left, right, and center and looking at urine sodium alone, look at the volume status. If the patient is euvolemic, then you need to be adding things like tolvaptan. Otherwise, you need to be looking at fluid restriction rather than giving drugs. Let's also look at another thing that's done. Emergency tips. Patient is coming with refractory variceal bleed, failure to control bleeding, or the patient is having an elective tips for ascites. So again, looking at the global longitudinal strain and not just the ejection fraction is going to help you more. And then GLS less than more than 16%, which means less contractility, predicts mortality or poor outcomes. So this is a component of hepatocardiorenal syndrome. So we are going to have patients who are TIPS who are going to do poorly after the TIPS, and the presence of CCM actually determines the ones who are going to do poorly. Next thing, liver transplantation. All of us are, I think, how many of us are in transplant hepatology practice? Not so many in the audience, maybe just 20%. Maybe transplant hepatologists are not interested in POCUS, but we should be, because looking at this every day determines what fluids have to be given, how much volume drain replacement has to be given. On a day-to-day basis, we can actually use POCUS to determine. Our intensivists do it for us, but maybe it will be worthwhile for us critical care hepatologists to also learn. So Western series say ACS is the most common cause of death, but in India, any number of these other causes, especially arrhythmia, heart failure, and sudden cardiac events actually lead to mortality. After that, CAD due to NODAT probably is the main cause. Then coming to AKI, I thank Dr. Kulkarni here for these slides. Looking at the new classification of HRS, AKI, AKD, CKD, well, the patient, when he's come to you, you don't know whether the renal dysfunction is going to last 6 weeks, more than 6 weeks, going to need dialysis. The patient is in front of you at certain time point, you have a few lab values, and you need to decide the pathophysiology. What do you need to treat the patient with? POCUS can help. If the patient is volume depleted, if the patient is not having a good IVC variation, cardiac index is low, so maybe it is a pre-renal. If the patient is hypervolemic, there is high cardiac output, maybe the patient actually needs diuretics. If the patient has normal POCUS and all kidney parameters are showing other changes, maybe it is interstitial nephritis, toxic ATN. So a pathophysiological understanding of what is happening with the kidney might help us more than just a classification system based for research purpose. So please look at it in that term. So volume assessment, we have discussed IVC assessment, and this paper clearly showed that there are patients where if their fluid depletion is right at the outset, you can start with vasoconstrictor straight away. And there is a category of patient where they're completely, there's a cardiorenal syndrome, they are volume overloaded. This is frequently seen in nephrology practice. There one has to give diuretics rather than being given tolvaptan. So we found that POCUS was also useful in predicting terlipressin related outcomes. and is a valuable tool at the bedside. Lastly, cirrhotic cardiomyopathy can tell us whether cardiac index is going down and when beta blockers should be stopped. Rather than looking at MAP targets, we can actually look at a progressive reduction in cardiac index. So it is going to help us with the window for use of beta blockers. Last, one word about alcohol and the heart. Alcohol-associated cardiomyopathy is a frequent worrisome thing in patients with liver disease. I just need a minute more. And withdrawal of alcohol might actually help, but alcohol-associated cardiomyopathy is a dilated cardiomyopathy, whereas cirrhosis-associated cardiomyopathy is a hyperdynamic, high-output cardiac failure. So this is my summary slide. We need to understand the heart-liver axis and the renal axis very clearly in patients with liver disease, especially when they come to us in daily clinical practice, whether it is for ascites, variceal bleeding, whether it is for AKI, or whether they are there for transplant workup. And any number of these diseases can be affected by the presence of cirrhotic cardiomyopathy and coronary artery disease. So all the literature is featuring on evaluation of the left heart, whereas I would invite you to focus on the right heart as well. I thank you all for your patient listening. Thanks.